up and sit down.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Fight for Liberty show on Free Speech Media. Today, we are joined by a very special guest. He is a mentor, a consultant, an author of 3 books and over 200 different articles, and host of Deconstructed for Independent Voter News. Mr. TJ O'Hara, thank you so much for joining us. How's it going?
My pleasure to be here. Thank you, David.
All right. So you have lived a pretty impressive lifestyle. You got a pretty padded resume. I'm curious, what was the first project that you really went above and beyond on? Where did this kind of like overachiever personality start off?
I think it was at childbirth. I was in a crib by myself. No, I'm kidding. I don't consider myself to be an overachiever. I don't really think I've done anything that different than other people. Maybe it's documented a little bit more, but I've always just focused on trying to do my best. And if I can help people, that's one of my key areas of focus. So anytime I've been able to help people, going back to childhood through young adulthood and certainly through my senior years now, I try and help as many people as I possibly can.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's I guess the most noble reason you could have to get into this kind of line of work. So what led you to start writing all of what you were doing down? Actually putting it into articles and books and authoring things about it.
Well, I like to tell people when they say, "What do you do for a living?" I tell them I'm a repairman. The only thing is I happen to repair companies and countries. So over 30 years, I had been doing turnarounds. And in the context of doing turnarounds, I had seen a lot of different things, worked with a lot of different issues, found a lot of common problems. Well, I finished the last turnaround that I was involved in, and I was looking for something to do, and I wanted to transition a little bit. And I started writing. And one of the things that always fascinated and I didn't have a lot of time for were politics. I'd always been in the corporate environment. So my turnarounds were all corporations that were, as in my consulting firm, they had a line that if it ended up on my desk, they were out of money, they were out of ideas, and they were out of hope. And my job was to resurrect the dead. So, I started looking at politics and I thought, we're starting to trend that way. We're definitely out of money. We're starting to run out of ideas, and there are a lot of people that are without hope. So back around 2008, I started writing just for my own entertainment and for other people's entertainment. And I thought if I put a little bit of humor in it, if I wrote books and articles from a satirical standpoint, that people might become more engaged, because back in that time frame, people weren't as engaged with politics as they are today. And by writing satirical things, I could lure them in. It was almost like a drug that I could hook them on, because they'd want to see what the next line was and so forth.
Right.
So I did that for a year or two, and I had some publishers contact me, and they said, we think we'd like to do an anthology of your articles. And I thought, well, the articles are already out there. Who in the world's going to, in their right mind, is going to buy a book that's already available piecemeal in the world? So I said, you know what, I appreciate the compliment, and I'm delighted that you like my writing, but let me see if I can find something that's an appropriate project. If I can, then I'll consider writing a book. So I have a lot of friends that are far left, far right, everything in between. And I started doing soft market surveys. So I just started asking questions like I'm very well may have called you had I known you at the time, and just asking you a series of questions to find out what was meaningful to you. That's what I was looking for. And one of the things that happened was there were only 2 commonalities between the people who were far left and far right. They were all absolutely passionate about their beliefs. And they absolutely thought the other side was wrong. It wasn't even up for discussion. So I thought, well, that's interesting. Then I asked a final question. And I always ask them, have you ever read the national platform of either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party? And my thought process behind that, I didn't expect them to have read both, but I thought if they've read one, then if they really liked it, let's say it was the DNC's national platform. If they really liked it, well, then I could understand why they would socially identify as a Democrat. If they hated it, I could understand by default why they might assume that they were a Republican. Mm-hmm. Same thing, conversely, had they read the Republican National Committee's report. The problem was, and this was embarrassing, almost 50%, it was just a shade under 50%, didn't even know there was a national platform in a presidential year. Had no idea. So that was a little frightening. And
let alone read it. They didn't even know it existed?
Didn't even know it existed. And I'm telling you, if you go out on the street and you ask people, you'll be lucky to get to 50% that actually know that there's a national platform. Mm-hmm. So when I asked them, have you read it? Either one of them, 100% said no. So I thought, okay, well, that's interesting, because on the one hand, I have people that are wildly passionate about their belief. And on the other hand, I have no factual basis for that belief. So I thought, well, what if I explore that? So what I did is, in fact, I've got one here. You talked about the books. It was a trilogy I wrote in 2010. Wrote a book called The Left Isn't Right. And The Left Isn't Right is a, somewhat sarcastic, but really satirical takedown of the Democratic National Committee's national platform. But when you get to the middle of this book, and you probably can't see it, but it becomes upside down. And what that meant was I had done the same thing. If you flip the book over, I'd done the same thing to the Conservative Party, to the Republicans. So I took word for word, grammatical error for grammatical error, misspellings, everything, and put them in this book and then dissected them so that people could understand, in hopefully a humorous vein, what the parties actually said. What was interesting is I had a lot of people respond to me and say, well, it was a very interesting book. First of all, they loved the fact that it was a flip book. They'd never seen anything like that before. My publisher hadn't done anything like that before. And
that's pretty cool.
They enjoyed it, but they said they almost inherently started with the opposing party. So if they were Democrat, they read the right is wrong first. If they were Republican, they read the left isn't right first. And inherently, they came back with the same comment. I really liked the first book. Then I got to the middle and I realized everything was upside down. You'd done the same thing to my party. Mm-hmm. And then some of them said, well, it took me a couple of days to gather up the courage to flip the book, or they read it right away. And they also always said, I didn't like that book as much. No kidding. It didn't align with their beliefs. But mm-hmm. The other thing that was fascinating is the vast majority came back and said, while I didn't like that as much, I didn't know, let's say it was a Democrat, I didn't know the Republicans said this on XYZ issue. Mm-hmm. I actually agree with them more than I agree with my party. And the Republicans did the same thing. And what happened was exactly what I was trying to trigger. I was trying to help them understand it's not always the sound bites that you hear on TV. It's not the one-sided approach. That there's something probably in both parties' platform that if you're being honest with yourself in the privacy of your own home as you're reading a book, you may actually agree with the other side. Mm-hmm. And every now and then we hear somebody actually admit to that. It's just not something that's prevalent these days because we polarized ourselves. So that was that book, and that led to another idea. So I wrote a book called The National Platform of Common Sense. So I've already taken down the Republicans and the Democrats, and I thought, you know what they're both missing? Nobody's
common
ever.
Sense?
Yeah, really. You notice it was the Common Sense Star. That was my nom de plume at the time. But nobody had really on either side and either platform correctly looked at the values that are offered by the Declaration of Independence, nor had they really given full dress treatment to the Constitution. So I thought, what if we actually applied the Founding Fathers documents? Could we solve the problems? So again, I did it in a satirical manner and walk people through the most critical issues. At the end of that book, I go through the critical issues at our time, which unfortunately, that was 2010. We still have the same critical issues. So we haven't done anything to solve them. And we go through that, and I try and do it in a humorous way. And that's what actually led to getting me involved in politics a few years later. Because the first nationally syndicated show I did, the host, he was laughing about some of the comments. We talked about the border, for example. I'll give you one example. At the time, the piece de resistance is usually the last thing you close with, right? I mean, if you're writing a book, you want to come out with something powerful. The Democrats came out with, they wanted to include DC and Puerto Rico and the other territories as states. I can't even remember what the Republicans did. It was so lame. But it's like, this is the best you guys can do to close with. But I jokingly said, the Democrats may be onto something. We have a problem at the border. This was pre-Trump wall and that discussion. I said, we've got such a large border that we can't adequately patrol it or erect barriers and so forth. At the time, at least that was the belief. So I jokingly said, what if we captured what the Democrats are trying to do, but rather than territories, what if we acquired Mexico? That shortens the border. But what if we also got Honduras and Guatemala and Costa Rica? And I went on down the list. I said, we get down to the Panama Canal. That's 10 miles. You and I can patrol that with a carbine. I mean, it's not hard to do 10 miles, two guys patrolling it, and we've got the border under control. So I just said it mockingly. And the syndicated host said, it's funny, but that would actually work. So we started laughing about it, and he asked me a poignant question. He said, would you ever run for president of the United States? And I was honest with him. I said, of course not. Famous last words, right?
Right.
And he said, well, why? He said, you tease in this book, and it's sarcastic and it's funny and satirical, but a lot of behind the scenes comments are actually very relevant and would solve a lot of the problems. Why wouldn't you run? And I said, well, 2 reasons. I have too much integrity and I'm not a clinical narcissist. And I wasn't at the time. I didn't run to win. For those who are saying, you ended up running. I didn't run to win. I ran to educate. And that was the difference. I was going to be outspent by $1 billion by 2 well-known people, President Obama at the time and former Governor Romney. So I'm going to be outspent cumulatively by $2 billion, no matter what I do. To get your name on the ballot cost back then, to get on all 50 states, would have cost about $70 million. I don't have that type of egos to waste other people's money trying to just see my name on a ballot. So I went the write-in route, and there were some other humorous things that happened around that. But really what I tried to do, I concentrated particularly on millennials. And the reason I did that was I felt the only way for a rational candidate who wasn't committed to a party platform and be used as a puppet by a party, the only rational way to change that paradigm, since you can't, unless you're a billionaire, you can't raise the money to compete. And if you're not a member of the 2 parties, you're not going to have enough money to compete. Nope. So the only way to do it is to go to the millennials who knew how to use social media and see if over time you could teach them the importance of creating a story where they make somebody so relevant that potentially the mainstream media has to capitulate and actually feature that person.
Right.
That was funny. The year that I ran in 2012, the media was all over. We need a third-party candidate. So we contacted all the networks. They wouldn't have you on. You couldn't boost ratings. Nobody knew who I was. And so it was all about ratings and money and growing market share. I totally get that, having been in business, totally understand that. But the problem was they weren't actually following what their pattern was in their discussion. They're desperate for a third-party candidate. And they literally had at least one that I can say was prepared, because in the years leading up to 2012 and the 4 years prior, I was working about 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, doing politics, researching every issue, coming up with viable solutions and so forth. So you had a person that had by the time I was actually running in 2012, probably around 12 to 15,000 hours invested in studying, in effect, how to solve our nation's problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean the media shutout is something that we fight over in the Libertarian Party all the time. You know, we had a candidate in that race too that I didn't even know about because I wasn't a libertarian yet. I
Yeah,
found the party
Gary
because
was
of Gary
actually following
Johnson.
me around.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I followed that race. That race is actually what got me into politics, because I loved what Mitt Romney did. Just the route of like successful in business, establish a reputation that you're good with that kind of stuff, and then move that into politics. Like that, watching him do that, I was like, that looks like fun. I'm gonna do that with my life. And yeah, I had no idea that there was even that third parties existed at the time. I didn't know that there was any other people on the ballot.
Well, there certainly were. Gary,
Mm-hmm.
when we were going through the Midwest, Gary was actually, wherever I was, Gary was like a day or two behind me. So we were somewhat tracking each other. The president had come through before, Mitt had come in between the president and myself. And so it was kind of interesting to go through that route. But yeah, I never really got to link up with him during the campaign, but we were supposed to debate a couple of times. And he showed up for one debate and left like midway into the debate, which was interesting. And Dr. Stein got herself arrested twice to get out of debates. She was scheduled for two debates with me on a couple of other networks, minor networks, and both times she was in jail because she had tried to penetrate the presidential debates that were aired on TV.
Right.
So it was an interesting year.
The Libertarian Party does not have a lot of love for the Green Party, but I respect the hell out of Jill Stein, Dr. Jill Stein. Gotta make sure I put the respect on that name, for what she did there, because we wanted to do it with Joe Jorgensen and we just didn't. Like no one, like it just didn't happen. Like Joe didn't actually want to pull the trigger on it and actually show up to the debates. We had 150 people ready to like march her into the debates, like protecting her and like pushing her up. She wouldn't have gotten arrested like Jill did. Like we would have kept her protected, but just didn't happen. So I have a lot of respect for Jill going and actually doing that and trying to get seen.
Well, anybody who seriously runs, I have tremendous amount of respect for, because you're going to lose family and friends over it.
Mm-hmm.
I had people, like I said, I'm going to be outspent by $1 billion by the top tier candidates. So there was no rational way for me to impact that election other than planting seeds of rational thought and showing people what real solutions look like, and when you're not just orchestrated as a candidate. But the reality is people don't see that. They see you running as a threat. So whether, the Libertarian candidate or the Green Party candidate or any of the other third party candidates or an independent like myself, while I won a nomination, I didn't accept the nomination. I just accepted an endorsement because I thought it was important to let people understand that you could actually run if you were independent. There's nothing in the Constitution that says you have to be a member of a party. And you have no idea how many people didn't know that. That question came up all the time.
Yeah, I'm getting that problem right now because I've said it a few times. I've pissed a lot of libertarians off in the last couple of months because I've said two different things that kind of sound similar, but I don't think that a libertarian is the person that like changes that wins that seat, right? I think it's an independent, and also I think it should be an independent. I think the president shouldn't be a partisan position. I think that should just be a nonpartisan position for forever. There should always be an independent. Congress can be partisan, that's fine. I don't think the president should be partisan at all. So I've gotten a lot of people upset. I said this to Justin Amash's, like not to his face technically because it was Clubhouse, but that didn't go over so well in the Clubhouse room that I was in at the time. But yeah, I very much think that we need to return to literally our roots. First president was the only one that had this correct and understood how bad parties were and understood that the president needed to be independent and a mediator for all of the people.
Well, if you think about it, in 2012, one of the things I would talk to groups about, I did a lot of presentations on college campuses, no campaign speech, but just open Q&A, any question, foreign or domestic, so that they could really delve into it and find out what a prepared candidate looked like. And one of the things I told them, they would say, well, why are you running as an independent? If you're serious, why don't you run as a Republican or a Democrat? Mm-hmm. And I told them, I said, think about this. Very much to your point, where Washington was the first independent candidate and for all intents and purposes, the last. An independent candidate isn't a trophy paraded around by a party, and that's what the presidency has become. You look at any of our candidates in my lifetime, they're paraded around by the party. About 50% of their time is campaigning on behalf of people they've never met. So you've got this incredible lie going on where the president of the United States comes in town. Let's say you're running for mayor and I'm president of the United States. You call a press conference, you get 50 people. I come in town to pretend I know you and endorse you because you're part of my party. You get 5,000 people. Mm-hmm. And that translates into money and votes. And that's what politics at the party level is about. Yep. So they use the president, at least 50% of his or her time is spent campaigning on behalf of other candidates or pushing the party agenda. Mm-hmm. The first thing you give up, one of the things I've said is, if you think that a party candidate is a good idea, take a look at who they've delivered. So how's that working for us? Right. And when you think about it, I use one of the things I would tell large groups if I'm on a college campus, I say, think about it for a moment. You've got a person who colloquially is known as leader of the free world. It's a pretty lofty title. And yet you don't attract leaders. The parties have no interest in attracting a leader. They attract followers. Mm-hmm. Now that sounds like a, heretical comment to make. The reality is they are followers because they tend to attract people who are so focused on winning. They want to be president. Barack Obama desperately wanted to be president. Mm-hmm. You had Mitt Romney the year I was running. I think he wanted to one up his father. They had both been governors. He wanted to be president. So what's the first thing they sacrifice? In return for the infrastructure and the money, they sacrifice the ability to lead. Mm. They can't exercise independent thought. So think about a Democrat or Republican, I don't care which candidate it is. Somebody is doing their hair. Somebody is dressing them. My favorite is when they come in with the rolled up sleeves, showing they're ready to get to work, and the blue jeans, which they probably never wear outside of the office. But they want to show they're in touch with the common man. And the reality is they have marketing strategists who put together the human wallpaper that I like to call the bobbleheads behind them. Now think about this. If you're running for president of the United States and leader of the free world, do you really need a cosmopolitan look behind you with, if you're talking about Medicare or something like that, they have to be dressed in their doctor's smocks and so forth, their scrubs. The reality is your word should stand on its own. Your intellect should stand on its own, but they have to have the support of human wallpaper going like this behind them, which is why I call it bobbleheads. So those people are all selected by marketing strategists to present the right image, to add credibility to a person who wants to be president of the United States. Then they have the political strategists and the pollsters. So the pollsters collect data, the political strategists frack it, so they separate what's not favorable and throw it out, emphasize what is favorable, put together talking points, turn it over to, in the case of President Obama, when I was running against him, 23 professional writers who then took those bullet points, crafted wonderful phrases around it, And at the end of the day, the president read them off of a teleprompter. So do we really know what he thinks about an issue or whether he has a true position? We just know that he's a good reader.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we've seen. President Trump wasn't as good with the teleprompter, so he brought a different character to the table, and he was perhaps a little less controlled, I think would be reasonable to say, by the party, but they still used him as a trophy to take around the country to get other people elected and to push their party agenda. Mm-hmm. So you don't get a
They
leader.
used him even better with that one. They were able to parade him around because that's what he wanted. He wanted to be everybody's favorite person. He wanted to be that person that showed up and made a 50-person rally turn into a 5,000-person rally because he was showing up to endorse somebody. He ate that shit up from start to finish. That's why he wanted to be president. He knew the dirty politics. He knew what his job really was. He knew that 50% of his time was going around just patting people on the back and saying, "Good job, random stranger. People should vote for you." Like, he was into that from the get-go. They used him. I don't even know if they used him for that. I don't know if he just willingly did it, like, knowingly.
I suspect he did it knowingly, and he did it willingly as well. It fits his personality. I mean, he has all the characteristics. If you looked up clinical narcissism, you'd probably find a picture of him. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It is perhaps when it gets to his level where every issue became about him. I think that was his downfall. I think he had good points and bad points. I didn't take him, I'll be honest with you, I didn't take him seriously when he first entered the race. And it was about midway through, I started warning people, he's got a chance to win. And they laughed at me. I had presidential candidates at the time that I was consulting with, and I said, don't laugh. He has a chance. Mm-hmm. And what I recognized, while he is inarticulate, I think that would be a pleasant way of framing his speech patterns and so forth. He's inarticulate, which I don't think fits what I would characterize as a requirement for the leader of the United States of America. But I started recognizing he was tapping into the common man. And look what he's done with the Republican Party. He shifted the people who normally are considered Democratic voters, and he radically shifted a lot of them, the blue-collar workers and so forth that Hillary dismissed. She just assumed they were going to vote for her. And he went after them, and he captured them. Yep. And I think part of it was his simplistic speech and that he reflected a more common touch. Mm-hmm. So maybe he's more sophisticated than I think from a communication standpoint. I don't believe that he is, but it worked for him, and he had the personality to pull it off. So kudos to him.
Yeah, the Democratic Party has assumed their votes for quite some time, and actually both parties kind of have. And I think it's one of the things that lost Trump 2020 was he made the same mistake. I think that there was some really like stereotypically Republican voting blocks that went blue this time around that no one would have expected. But the same thing in 2016, vice versa, like what you're talking about. People in these two major parties, they just assume all of these like extremely racist and stereotypical things of like, oh, well, they have melanin, so they have to vote Democratic. Or like, oh, he has money, so he must be a Republican. Or, oh, they go to church, so they must vote red. Like those things aren't true anymore. Yep. And they're not nearly as true as they used to be. And actually, none of those things that I just said are even close to true. I know so many like quote unquote libtard Christians at this point. Like I know more blue Christians than I know red Christians at this point. So, we're blurring the lines, and it's weird.
Well, I think you're spot on. I think what worked in the past may not be working in the future. I do share your belief. I think the Democratic Party took a lot of constituencies for granted. I talk about that in the books. One of the things I mentioned, I think the Democrats in the past have brilliantly marketed themselves. What they do, they're particularly keen at controlling the narrative. So they shape with horrific words like racist, misogynist, sexist, homophobe, xenophobe, Islamophobe, whatever they choose. They shut down discussion. They paint the other side with hateful terms, and people buy it. So from a marketing standpoint, they did a brilliant job of branding. From a marketing standpoint, the Republicans are probably the most inept party I've ever seen in my life. They don't know or haven't known how to control the narrative. Whether I like his style or not, one thing that Trump did a good job of was the branding. Mm-hmm. He controlled the narrative better than most anybody they've had on the Republican side in recent history. So it's an interesting dichotomy. I talk about strategies in the books. One of the ones that the Democrats have exploited, I call the oppressed minority strategy. Think about it. The reason they've counted on constituency votes, they have inherently, race to race, gone to their constituents and they separate them. And they continue to do it today with identity politics. They separate white from black, from Asian, from Native Americans, from gay, from straight, from men, from women, and so forth. They separate you. Once they've separated you, they tell you, I'm the only person that feels your pain. I don't want to sound like Bill Clinton. He always wanted to feel your pain, bite the lower lip afterwards, So he'd get in touch with people, but he would make them feel, and he was excellent at it, make them believe that he and his party felt their pain. Now he separated them, but he majorly separated them from the opposing party, which is what they want to do. So the oppressed minority strategy is done like that. Then what do you do at the end? Well, I'm the only one who believes you, but your brother over here and your sister over there, they have problems too. So we have to coalesce and all vote together. And that's how they counted on votes. Mm-hmm. And if Trump did a service for the country in his own unique way, he started exposing some of that. Mm-hmm. And he picked up more Hispanic vote, he picked up more black vote, and so forth. Now, I think either of the parties have ever really done anything for any of those separate constituencies? No. The only thing they've done is exploited sound bites and bulleted phrases that make people believe that they should allow them to separate them from their money or their votes. Mm-hmm. But as far as actually fixing the problem, there hasn't been a lot of that.
Mm-mm. Well, because if they fix the problem, then they can't run for re-election on a promise to fix it.
Bingo.
That's
exactly completely what it is. They'd rather keep it as an issue. Mm-hmm. The other thing that they've done, and you've seen this, let's talk at the presidential level. One of the things that I told people that if by some grace of God I would have been elected, I was going to be a 24/7 president. When you do turnarounds in the corporate environment, it's like you get to decide what 18 hours a day you work. It's not a 9 to 5 job. You're working whatever hours it takes to get the job done. President of the United States to me is a 4-year commitment to work 24/7 on the problems of the country. So I committed at that point in time. And one of the things that resonated with people when I said they saw an actual candidate who was prepared to do the job, I committed. I will never endorse another candidate. I will not, campaign on behalf of another candidate. I don't have a party, first of all. So there's no candidate or party pressure to do that. But I'm not going to waste a minute of time campaigning or supporting a party platform. I'm going to spend all my time working for the people of the United States. Now, that also means I will never run again. Now, if I got drafted and won the nomination and became president of the United States again, of course I'd serve. To me, that position is the ultimate civil service job. The only difference when you look at senators and congressmen and congresspersons and presidents, the only difference between them and your mailman or your firefighter or your police officer is everybody else had to take a test. Political people don't have to take a test. They have to raise money and be willing to do as they're told. That's why I say
Wouldn't it be great if they had to take a test? They should.
In the National Platform of Common Sense, I said, why don't we test them? The oath of office, every oath of office has 7 words that are identical. Now they're different. The president's oath is different than the House and the Senate and the judiciary. But every oath of office has 7 common words: to defend the Constitution of the United States. Now, if your oath is to defend the Constitution of the United States, shouldn't you be familiar with it? So let's test them on it. And I jokingly in the book, because it was satirical, and I said, now, even though there isn't allowed by Constitution to be a religious test, we'll allow them to pray that they can get the right answer when they take the test. But I said, we ought to say 80, 90%, whatever it is, that if you're in office and can't pass the test, you can't run again until you can pass the test. And if you are running for office, you have to pass before you can be on the ballot.
I like this a lot.
Well, it would be interesting. You know, I told people when I would start, I actually started with the oath. When I would talk to a group at a university, you know, have 300, 500, 1,000 people in the room, I'd start with the oath. I do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Dead silence after. I'd give them about 5 uncomfortable seconds of silence. And then I just smile at them. I said, I know what you're thinking. Why did you start with this oath? And I said, because I'm here to answer any question, foreign or domestic, without exception. But you've been conditioned to believe that you should ask me my opinion. And the reality is, the oath I just took suggests that my opinion is irrelevant. My responsibility is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Mm-hmm. So I will answer any question you ask, foreign or domestic. Try your Aleppo moment if you want, as Gary found out that during that time. I will answer any question, but the first thing we're going to determine is it a federal issue? Mm-hmm. Can I have any direct or indirect influence over it? Or is it reserved to the states under the 10th Amendment or the people under the 9th? And it was remarkable how we were able to get through issues. And then I would always, would take critical issues that other candidates refused to discuss on the campaign trail. I took any issue, but we would always start, is it a federal issue? Now, I knew at the end of the day, they really wanted to know my opinion, but it always had to be couched in terms of the Constitution. So what I would do, we'd go through it, and let's say it wasn't reserved to the federal government under the Constitution. That means it's either reserved to the states or the people, unless the federal government usurps the field. They have the right to do that under the Constitution. So then what I would do is I'd broaden the discussion. I say, okay, let's say they decide to usurp the field. Where would we look within either the values of the Declaration or the Constitution itself and its associated amendments? Where would we look for guidance that would suggest what the law needs to be? And the law doesn't mean your personal belief or my personal belief or a party's personal belief or a religious belief. It means a law that will treat people equally. So how would we have to craft the law consistent with the Constitution and its associated amendments in a way that it will allow the law to apply equally to everyone? And it was fascinating discussions. It'd only take me a minute or two to get to that point. Then we'd really dive into the issue and we'd solve the problem.
I love that. We need so much more of that in politics from all the parties and everybody in between. Are you familiar with the group Better Angels, or no? I think it's Braver Angels.
I've heard the group. I haven't really researched them or done anything with them.
They kind of popped into my head something you mentioned earlier, but one of the things that they do is they have like structured workshops where you come in and you're either a red person or you're a blue person, and it's structured out to foster communication between the two sides. And so, there's a period where, like, one side is saying, like, listing all of the misconceptions that they think that the other side has about them, and then vice versa, and then they talk about then they talk them out, and just go on. There's like this like a 6 hour like workshop with a lunch break in between, and like the whole
You've
work.
triggered a memory. I am familiar with them. They were on one of the Independent Voter Project's conference calls. There were a group of people, and they were bringing people in like every 30 minutes. They did have a speaker in that, so I am aware of that. And I was actually in a breakout. The name didn't ring a bell, but thanks for bringing back that memory, refreshing it.
Yeah, they're a really interesting group, and I personally, I don't like the fact that they make you choose a red or a blue when you join, because I'm a gold, right? I'm a libertarian, so I'm a little bit. I feel like in some ways it's counterproductive, but I've come to realize, after working with them more and more and getting to see kind of what they're accomplishing as a group of people, and like as a movement, it's a necessary first step, because most people already identify as a red or blue. Like, I'm an oddball, right? I'm beyond the dichotomy, and look at it in a completely different way. I'm a little bit further down this path. We need something in between to help the people who already pick a side and think the other side is completely moronic. We need something to help those people. The organization just isn't necessarily for me as where I feel and where I fit. But even myself, I get a lot of enjoyment out of going to the meetings and stuff, and I get to provide commentary. And I'm a red in the organization because I'm part of the New York affiliate. So as far as New York is concerned, I'm red comparatively.
Well, I think it's great. Anytime you have an opportunity to dialogue about the issues, you have a chance to solve a problem. The problem that we have no intelligent approach from a political standpoint to solving problems. You have a process that has failed. You also have a time frame that doesn't work. In the political realm, when you try and solve a problem, you're only concerned about the next 2 years or whatever part of an election cycle is left. There is no long-term planning from a political standpoint. They also fundamentally blow the process, because when you do problem resolution, the first thing you do is make sure you correctly define the problem. They can't do that, because if they correctly define the problem, it may reflect on them. Then the next thing you're supposed to do is correctly identify the root cause. Well, you can't do that because you might be the root cause, or something you've passed in the past may be the root cause. So you can't do that. Then you should actually consider every single viable alternative. Now, when I say viable, I mean it has to fit within the time frame of responses required. You have to be able to afford it. It has to have, if there's a technology associated with that actually exists in the real world, you can't just create fictitious solutions to problems, but you have to consider every viable solution. And what's one thing that the parties can't possibly do? They can't possibly consider the other side's solution because they don't want to give that win. I love that term, win. Who loses? We do.
Everyone.
They win, we lose. And that's what has made such a disaster of this country. Then something I think they almost never do, when I'm doing turnarounds in the corporate world, you always evaluate adverse consequences, whatever potential adverse consequences. What if your assumptions are wrong? Because every time you plan on a solution, there are assumptions involved in it. What if they prove to be wrong over time? Rationally, what you have to do is assess those adverse consequences and have a response prepared. Then when you pick the best solution, which they can't do because they can only look at half of the solutions. But if they pick the best solution, then they should be able to monitor it, measure it, and adjust. And they don't do any of those things. I think it was Lincoln that said if you wanted to see the equivalent of like eternal life, I'm going to ruin his quote, but the equivalent of eternal life is just a bill because it never goes away. Anything that's passed in Congress, it just doesn't go away. It doesn't matter whether it's achieved the objective. Half the time, they don't even know what the objective is. The objective is they want your vote and they want your money. So they frame it around something they promised. We're seeing this in pick an issue that the country's struggling with today, and you're seeing it. Immigration is, that's a prime example. So we look at it. Does that have an economic consequence? Yes. Have they addressed it?
Yeah.
No. Does it have a health impact? Yes. Have they addressed it adequately? No. Does it have an education impact? Yes. Have they addressed it? No. You go down the list. And they simply don't look that far in advance. What they try and do is pass a bill that pacifies people in a way that will keep those $3, $5, $10 donations rolling in every month and capture that vote the next time.
Yeah. Well, you hit the nail right on the head when you said they can't identify the root causes because it might be them. It almost always is them. When we really look at these root causes, like 89% of the time, it's something that the government did. You listed off like a bunch of, even immigration. We can look at why we have an influx of people coming in from the southern border, and we can be like, maybe it's because we've been bombing the shit out of their countries. Maybe we should stop doing that. Maybe we should stop assassinating dictators and toppling regimes. Maybe, maybe just a thought process. Maybe people wouldn't be running away from their countries as much anymore. And we can go down the list with healthcare, education, just about everything that people want to fix with more government. The solution is probably a little less government, or a little different government, at least.
Well, I would totally agree. I mean, I had people ask me, they always want to put a label on you, and I'm not really big on labels. So I used to call myself a rational constitutionalist, because I thought if I'm going to take an oath and I'm going to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, I'd at least be dedicated to the Constitution. So you start looking at the Constitution and say, what would a rational constitutionalist believe? Well, if you read the Constitution, I'm hard pressed to believe that you think that it suggests that the federal government should be massive and the most dominant element. It actually pushes more responsibility down to the states under the 10th Amendment, and it preserves liberties to the people under the 9th.
Yeah.
So you should be looking at limited government. You should believe in fiscally responsible government and liberties beyond belief, unless there is a social reason to prevent you from believing a certain way and living your life in a certain way, however you choose, then the government has no role in it. And instead, we have the government that wants to orchestrate it, and it's getting worse. I talk to people. It's fun when I was at on the campuses again. I have a big group. So I use a tease question. I said, how many do you think the federal government, I understand you're burdened with debt. A lot of you are burdened with debt for your education. How many of you believe the federal government should assist you? Almost, we're looking at almost 100% of the hands go up. Well, it's a setup question. Because I said, so in other words, you think the government has the responsibility to address that for you. In effect, that would make you happy, correct? And they go, yes, that would make me happy. So I'd say, well, let's go back to the Declaration. The second sentence, the most famous one in the Declaration, the one that Joe Biden can't remember, apparently. I'm not that other stuff, as Joe would say. But when you get to the unalienable rights, there are only three that are mentioned: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Which one of those is qualified? happiness. It's qualified because it doesn't guarantee, you're guaranteed life, you're guaranteed liberty, you're not guaranteed happiness, you're guaranteed the opportunity to pursue it. Now, why is that important? We talked about, I'm going to pretend like I'm still talking to the campus. I told them, I said, you told me it would make you happy if the government paid your tuition, paid down your debt. But if you give the government the responsibility for your happiness, you inherently have to delegate the authority for your happiness. Now, if you delegate the authority, they get to dictate to you what your happiness is. And at some point, they start telling you what school you can attend. They tell you what classes you can take, maybe what home you can live in, what type of car you can drive. We've seen this in other countries. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, and I joke with them, I'd say, and they may say, hey, is that your boyfriend or girlfriend? I don't think he or she's right for you. And they want to start picking everything for you, and everybody starts laughing. But, then they realize, wait a minute, that's not necessarily such a good thing. The other thing I used to do is take a dollar bill. I'd tease them. I said, look, I'm truly not a politician. So does anybody have a $1 bill in the front row? And invariably somebody had it. I said, now I'm not a politician. I will give it back. And they kind of laugh, So they give me the dollar bill, and I'd say, here's the difference. Let's say I came to you and I said, I'm going to tax you $1 to pay for that tuition. The government's going to put $1 towards everybody's tuition, collect $1 from everybody, amass it, and then pay off tuition. Let's think this through. There is no such thing as the government. How's that for an interesting comment? Government is just an organization of ideas that are fomented by people. So the government's only power is in regulation, correct? I mean, they don't make a product. They don't really deliver anything.
Right.
They basically regulate things. The closest they come to a product is defense at the federal level. But if you think about it, okay, if I'm going to regulate something, take that dollar bill and then put a little fold in it, because you have to pay for the infrastructure to promulgate those regulations. Somebody has to write them and distribute them and so forth. Well, then fold it again, because somebody has to monitor it. Since they're regulations, you have to monitor to make sure that people are in conformance. Oh, but wait, fold it again, because now you're going to have to enforce it, because somebody surely will not comply. Mm-hmm. So now I'm down to about $0.50. And I said, but wait, I can't give that. I did this at state universities in particular. I can't give that to you because I'm the federal government. You're in a state university. So I have to give it to your state government. And then I start folding it again, who will promulgate regulations, who will monitor the conformance, and who will enforce. So now I'm down to like a sliver. And I said, this is what gets back to you when the public sector administers your money. Now I said, now let's take a different scenario. Your state university, if your university gets an improved reputation over time, that adds value to your degree, correct? And everybody's, yeah, that's right. And I said, so remember, I've given this dollar back to you because the government's inherently inefficient. So I've given it back to you. But in the private sector, I come to you as the school and I say, look, you've got $1 in your pocket. I know you do, because the federal government didn't take it from you. Would you be willing to donate that to your alma mater so that we can do X, Y, and Z to improve your education? And then I'd go back to the student that I'd given the $1 back to, and I said, would you give me that $1? And he goes, sure. I said, remember, I was going to take it from you before, whether you wanted to give it to me or not. Now I'm asking you. Mm-hmm. And he said, no, I'd give it to you. So I take the $1 back and I hold the entire $1 up and I said, this is what you get when the private sector deals with the problem. The problem is most of our problems could be resolved by us in our private sector capacity. But politicians only gain value if they pretended they solved the problem. Mm-hmm. So unless they're bringing dollars back to their locale, to their district, or to their state, they haven't, in their mind, accomplished anything. The problem is they never solve the actual issue.
Mm-hmm. And it's all dollars.
Away.
Yeah. All they're trying to do is move money around. It's all just about the dollars. Who can throw more money at more problems, or take more money away from more bad people. It's all about fund and defund. Like that's the entirety of rhetoric right now in politics.
Well, the other thing is that they play with your behavior.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about it, I'm going to ask for your vote. Let's pretend I was a normal politician, okay? And I'm not an independent, so now I'm a party guy. So I've got some platform that appeals to you. You're on my voter rolls. I know that I can probably extract money from you. So one of the ways I earn your vote is I come back to you and I say, look at what I delivered to you. But I never mentioned I didn't deliver it to you. I used your money to give you part of your money back to deliver something that's kind of like what you really wanted or thought you wanted, but doesn't really make the problem go away, so I can run on again my next term.
Mm-hmm.
Gee, that's a deal, isn't it? I mean,
Right.
I lecture on the neuroscience of behavior, and one of the reasons I do it, particularly in the political environment, is because that's what's happening. The political parties do behavioral shaping, and they distinguish in-group versus out-group. We all have a need for affiliation, and that need makes us inclined to identify with a group. I don't identify with groups, which is, maybe I'm happier because of that. I'm certainly freer to think. But if I identify with a group, no matter how good that group is and all, they limit my range of thought. They limit my solution base. That's unacceptable to me. Mm-hmm. But in group behavior, what happens is, because of our need for an affiliation, it gives us social credibility. And what we do is we attribute perceived characteristics to that group. And for us to maintain our status within that group, we have to embrace and emulate what we perceive to be the characteristics. And we may be wrong. We could be completely wrong. But we perceive that. Then we become judgmental, because to enhance our status in group, we have to inherently compare ourselves out group. Well, the out group has to be wrong. Mm-hmm. And what's funny is it triggers moral outrage. How can these other people be so stupid? They can't understand anything. They're fundamentally crazy, and we can call them names rather than actually find out why they believe what they believe. And maybe they're right and maybe they're wrong. But, the other thing is we feel superior.
Oh, yeah.
Now, here's the danger. And I don't mean to get too wonkish on this, but in the neuroscience, there's a reward circuit and there's a punishment circuit. Punishment circuit is the fight or flight. Mm-hmm. Reward circuit makes you feel good. You get a dopamine dump. You get serotonin and a number of other chemicals. It's good for about 15 minutes. You get that rush. You're a little mellow. Feels good. Life is good. You get that from your group affiliation. You go in, you all agree on whatever the issue is, and you get that reward circuit triggered for about 15 minutes.
That's why I love Twitter so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So, here's the other side to Twitter and all social media, because social media is having a very deleterious impact on us. Mm-hmm. And here's why. When you trigger the fight or flight mechanism, you trigger cortisol and adrenaline. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting compound. That's what protected us against that old saber-toothed tiger back in the day. Nothing's changed. Right. So we get that adrenaline and cortisol dump. Here's the reality about that dump. That lasts 3.5 hours. And the human mind, when that dump occurs, what you're doing is triggering subconscious reaction. And I won't get in. It's a highly myelinated circuits, which they operate faster. They're electrically more efficient. So that's why we can respond quicker and all. When we're threatened, our physical responses are faster and so forth. Mm-hmm. We're more aware. Our senses are more aware. One other thing happens. This whole thing called the prefrontal cortex, which is what allows us to think, shuts down because now we're reacting.
Right.
So number one, we literally are getting dumber. Number two, the human mind can't distinguish. It was never meant to distinguish between emotional and physical threats. So when we were getting that saber-toothed tiger, once every 6 months or so, we ran into one. It saved us. That's why we're here today. But when we get aggravated by somebody on Twitter, like you said, somebody says something we don't like, and we flame them because they disagree with our in-group. So we're going to defend our status in that in-group. We get a cortisol and adrenaline dump. And then they say something back. We get another dose. Now remember, this stuff lasts 3.5 hours and accumulates, right? So the more we interact negatively on social media, the more we get this, we shut down our rational thought process and default to reaction to what we think is the appropriate characteristic. Beyond that, it causes microabrasions in your blood cells. Now, what's the problem with that? That's what cholesterol attaches to. So incidence of stroke and heart attack go up. So we're literally drugging ourselves, we're making ourselves dumber, and we're killing ourselves. What could go wrong? I mean, this is like the perfect scenario, right? And social media, the human mind was never meant to be bombarded by as much data as we're hit with. We aren't meant to process it. We're supposed to take time to rationally assess situations unless they're life or death. The problem is the parties have made almost every issue life and death within the belief structure of their third-party affiliates.
I advocate a lot for taking time off and just getting away from social media because it's a cesspool, especially Twitter. Everything that you said, 100% accurate. It's a daily thing. I wasn't actually being sarcastic though when I said that's why I love Twitter. Because on the positive side as well, because you were talking about the serotonin and dopamine fixes. Like today was a great day on Twitter. I had like a couple hundred notifications because I got tagged in like a few things, and I wasn't really on it, so I didn't see much that I disagreed with, and I didn't even engage with anything that I did disagree with, and it was just a whole bunch of dopamine pumps of just like people retweeting and sharing and liking and stuff. So sometimes it's great, but that's also addicting. Like whether you're doing the good thing, whether you're participating in an echo chamber and getting addicted to a dopamine fix of social media, or you're doing what you were mentioning, most people are doing both at the same time, which is extremely dangerous because now we're getting into like a Pavlovian confusion where getting upset and arguing and winning is the dopamine fix. And so like we're becoming worse and worse, and we're getting misguided in our addictions because that's what they are. So yeah, I'm a big advocate for like take a day off, turn your Twitter off for like a day, and just go live just a night. Like it's 8 o'clock, just turn your phone off and just don't.
I talk to some of my more partisan friends and interact with them on Facebook and Twitter and so forth, as you know. And sometimes I tell them exactly to do that. Take a day off. Are you actually valuing yourself as an individual based on the number of likes you get? How are you helping the world if all you do is attack with unfounded claims many, many times that you think are in alignment with a given party that you affiliate with? How are you improving the situation? Are you solving the problem? What you're doing is you're preventing anybody from interacting with you. You're not seeing the other side. You're not considering the alternatives, like we talked about problem resolution, decision support. You're not gaining any advantage by doing that. What you're doing is fostering the ongoing nature of the problem. And we're so convinced that that's okay to do. It's why we give Congress an approval rating in the teens, sometimes in the single digits, and we reelect 90% or more of all the senators and the congressmen.
Mm-hmm.
That's insane.
Yeah. That was basically my first objective, or the objective isn't quite the right word. My first campaign of thing, like my first mission, was against that like reelect the incumbent mentality. So I was the hashtag, and like the whole thing was elect the revolution. And so on my old site, which isn't up anymore, but hopefully we'll be piecing together parts of the old site into the new site. Uh, I had lists, literally, like I call it my shit list on the show, because there's like 3 or 4 separate lists of elected officials who voted or did a specific thing that is just clearly bad, and therefore they should never be reelected. And I had a list of like all the New York senators that and House reps or assembly representatives that voted against marijuana legalization in 2019, uh, or actually decriminalization. They voted against just decrim. So that was worse. Now we have a new list of people that voted against the legalization this past week. Yeah, so that was like the whole thing was really just stop re-electing these people. Like these people are awful. Like, how is Dianne Feinstein still getting reelected every year? Like Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell. Like, how is the same state reelecting Rand Paul and Thomas Massey and then Mitch McConnell? It just doesn't make sense to me.
Creatures of habit. I mean, that's what it is. It's name recognition. If a candidate has name recognition, look at how many of the candidates that are in office today are what I'll call a legacy candidate.
Yeah.
They either came in because somebody died and they were a member of the family. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, that's how she came to Congress. Legacy. You have so many people that if your name's Kennedy, if your name's wait till Chelsea Clinton runs. She'll run at some point in time because she's a Clinton. We had our go round with the Bushes. Tell me what DNA is involved in being an effective politician, somebody who actually represents the people. Like I said, it should be the highest form of civil service, and instead it's become, 2 words have been combined that were never meant to be together: career politician.
Right.
Back in the day, the reason that they had the House was
a dirty term
and the Senate was 6 years, they couldn't believe anybody would want to be away from their farm or their business that long, any longer than that. It was almost unbelievable that somebody would try and make a career out of politics.
Yeah. Which is why I think we missed an opportunity to get like term limits passed before this became a thing. I kind of wish we could go back and and put that in there before there were a bunch of career politicians to fight against it. Because now clearly, like, the people that are in there aren't going to vote for term limits. We need to. That's another thing that I did, or I supported with Elect the Revolution, was I came alongside the term limit pledge. There's a whole bunch of congressional and Senate candidates that have signed a pledge saying that they would support term limits if it came up. Like, don't vote for anyone that's not gonna vote for like a budget decrease for themselves and term limits for themselves, like, and have signed a thing promising to do so. Like, otherwise they don't need to be reelected.
Oh, there are a number of things we could do that would be interesting. I think doing an annual audit to show how people on $174,000 income suddenly become millionaires within a year or two. I think that would be fun to do an audit. Term limits and the National Platform of Common Sense. One of the things I offered was a variation that I haven't heard from other people, but I'll share with you and why I put it in. I said, what if we turned everything broad brush 6-year terms? And then what we do is 6 on, 6 off. So you can't run as a senator and win and serve 6 years and then just become a member of the House. No, you've got to go back to the private sector for 6 years. You have to go back and identify with people, make your way through the world, see what some of the laws you've passed, how they're impacting real people who aren't insulated, like the politicians in DC. How is the real world impacting you for 6 years? Then you can run again. Now, what happens if we do that? It takes away the name recognition, because in 6 years, people will forget. They'll remember the next name, but not necessarily the one prior. Secondly, it forces you into a real world situation. And third, it helps get rid of lobbies. Now, why does it get rid of lobbies? Well, David, if you're my congressional district representative, I can afford, because I know you're going to be in for 20 years, maybe 30, maybe 40. I can lay out a couple $1 million to buy you the first couple of years, because my return on investment is over an extended period of time.
Oh, yeah.
Down to 6 years, you're not seeing the $1 million. Suddenly your meals are going to drop down. Your free trips are going to go away. Because I've got to generate a return. So you start curbing from a private sector solution. You start taking the profit out of lobbyists, and you start curbing the lobbies. The other thing is, if the president is 6 years, guess what? There is no second term. So they have to serve all 6 years as president of the United States. There's no advantage to them to try and start running immediately, because we have a perpetual presidency now. Joe Biden is already running for re-election. I hope he's in a position that if that's something he chooses to pursue, that he gets to do that in his life. But the reality is he's already running for it. Barack Obama started running day one. Donald Trump never stopped running. And what happens? We're bringing a person in the private sector. You're hiring a CEO. Can you imagine, as a shareholder or as a member of the board, you hire me as CEO, and I come in the first day. I thank you all. Thank you for your confidence. And I just wanted to let you know, in the 50% of my time that I'm going to actually spend doing the job, would I get another word out of my mouth? Fire me.
Right.
No rational person is going to say, well, great. Wow, he's going to give us 50%. We were only counting on 25.
Right.
That's not it. Make the person serve. And if it truly is the highest level of civil service, then honor it. Honor the oath. Honor the people. None of it's your money when you're serving in any of those offices. You're impacting everybody's life. I'll suggest one of my favorite sections of the Constitution is Article 1, Section 8. That's the one that gives Congress the right to lay taxes and duties and imposts and so on.
Right.
Now, it's not only to pay the debt. There are two other issues. There's provide for the common defense or the general welfare of the United States. Common defense, we figure that out. We accept that. We get the second part completely wrong. On defense, we look at something and we say, okay, if France attacks Rhode Island and Rhode Island isn't part of the United States, France clobbers Rhode Island. But if it's part of the United States, the common defense, France gets its head handed to it. So we get defense. How about general welfare of the United States? It doesn't say general welfare of the constituencies that you've convinced to vote for you thoughtlessly. It says of the United States. That implies equal opportunity, equal application.
Yes.
So what if Congress only taxed and funded programs? Now, the states can do other things, local governments can do other things, but the federal government only did things that uniformly helped everyone in an equal way. So I'll give you an example where we do get it right. Katrina hits. Louisiana can't recover on its own from that type of catastrophic disaster. So it's no different than insurance. So we pool our assets together because we believe that's the right thing. It could be wildfires out in California or earthquakes. It could be tornadoes in Oklahoma. By the way, I saw you had Rex Lahorn on. He used to interact with my Facebook page all the time. Great guy.
Such a good guy.
But we all have different natural disasters we can't control, things we can't recover from. So out of the goodness of our heart, the values that we have collectively, we're willing to chip in a few bucks to help others out because it'll help us too. But what we get wrong are all these petty little programs that are done because they'll inure to the benefit of your district, and I represent your district, and so I can go back and say, well, I did this thing. Well, it's really not for anybody but you. The classic bridges to nowhere, the new rail system up in San Francisco. We can spend all this type of money.
Oh my gosh.
Who does that help collectively? That ought to be a state responsibility under the 10th Amendment or the local governments under the state constitution.
So I'm curious your opinion on that's not how words work. The direct election of senators, as opposed to how the
17th Amendment.
Do it. Yeah.
The 17th Amendment is classic government solving the wrong problem the wrong way. The reason, if you really get into the history and if you respect the Constitution that you take this oath to defend, no matter who you are, they should have realized at the time the reason the Senate was different than the House was the House actually had a nexus with the state at a local level. The Senate was to represent the state's interest, not the local people's interest. So the House was there for that. They're in for 2 years. I'm your next door neighbor. I go one term. You go for me the next term. We represent each other. We know each other. We know what the local issues are. So the local element is taken care of through the House. They wanted a more elite group, quite frankly, more other than you and me, just the common guy from the neighborhood. They wanted somebody who was better educated, perhaps had more experience, maybe a little more senior to come in. That's why they got 6 years. And that's why the filibuster is in place for that reason. So a minority can still have a vote and force them to have to get to 60 to be able to pass something. So they were a litmus test of rational legitimacy for the House.
Yes.
And what we did, because there was some corruption, some governors, big surprise, got money to pick who they wanted, or the party that was in power got to pick who they wanted. It was either somebody that raised a lot of money for them or wrote a big check. So they thought, well, if we make all the people vote, they can't write a check to everybody. In a sense, they do in the way that they campaign. But
yeah, they figured out how to do that anyway.
We exacerbated the problem. We exacerbated the size of the bribery. It was beyond their comprehension at the time, but we didn't solve the issue. So now we have, as Joe Manchin has said, Senator Manchin has said, he said, if we get rid of the filibuster, we're basically just the House of Representatives with a longer term. And he's right. He's absolutely right. But people don't know the 17th Amendment.
Yeah, it's one of my least favorite things. And I find the Constitution really interesting because I used to consider myself similar to what you said, like a staunch constitutional conservative or a constitutionalist. Like I'm a big fan. I'm a Second Amendment absolutist. But then there's things in there like the 17th Amendment where I'm like, this is stupid and shouldn't exist. And then there's like the amendment that created prohibition, and I'm kind of like, yeah, sometimes the Constitution can be wrong.
And sometimes they even admit it.
Right. Later on. Right.
I tell people when I recommend that they pay attention to the Constitution since it's in everyone's oath, I always tell them, if you don't have to know it where you can quote it. I'm probably more deeply involved with it than most people, but I say, take the Cliff Notes version. Even though it's not part of the Constitution, technically, the preamble,
Mhm.
Read the first three words, we the people. It doesn't say we the men, we the women, the gays, the straights, the blacks, the whites, the Asians, the Native Americans, or whatever other category you want to use to divide us. And it most certainly does not say we the Democrats or we the Republicans.
Right.
And if we
Because those
recognize
didn't
that,
exist yet.
yeah, if we recognize that, a lot of our problems would go away. We pretend
Mhm.
that the major parties are anointed with power and will inherently represent our best interest. And that almost certainly is not true.
Never seems to be true. Yeah, uh, I find specifically on the issue of prohibition, I find it a little bit more respectable than some of the other things that have gone wrong in the federal government because it's in the Constitution. They did the bad thing the one way that they're actually able to do it, and that's by changing the Constitution. Like
Yeah.
the 10th Amendment says, if it doesn't say it here, you can't do it. So if you want to do it, you got to put it there. And they did.
I always tell people the beauty of the Constitution is that the framers knew that it wasn't a perfect document. And the way they perfected it was to put in Article 5, the ability to amend. They set the bar high as it should be. It shouldn't be just, finger in the air, atmospheric extraction about this is what I think it should be, and so we're going to change it tomorrow. No, it's got to be a heavy burden because you're changing the law that applies to 330 million people at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be a serious decision, and it should merit serious discussion. But it's there. And for these people to say, well, we can't amend the Constitution, it'll get out of control. It was there for a purpose. Mm-hmm. It only gets out of control if you allow it to. And if you're going to allow it to be abused, then you shouldn't be serving. Mm-hmm. Step down, let somebody who cares about the country actually serve.
Right. Well, I think this is like 5 out of like 7 episodes in a row where Article 5 of the Constitution has been mentioned. Because I've had multiple people bring up the Convention of the States as a possible outcome to fixing just unimaginable clusterfuck that is the federal government right now.
If you think about it, think of how smart the framers were, because they not only put in a normative model for amendment going through Congress, but they apparently anticipated we may get some people that are so horrific at some point in time that we may need an alternative. So they came up with the Convention of the States. Smart.
Yeah. They really did some good thinking. They did some bad thinking again. Like, they could have like freed the slaves at the same time, like some of them wanted to, or, they could have done a couple of other things a little bit better.
Yeah, the slave issue, because we had all these white old men who were slave owners. A lot of people misinterpret the 3/5 vote. That was to prevent the South from being able to control the vote and making slavery permanent in the United States. So the smart thinking was over time. There was actually, I think it was about a 19-year period, there was a law that was going to lapse. And Jefferson, for one, was almost sure it was going to go away, even though he was a slave owner. But at the time, they couldn't have created a United States without the South. Mm-hmm. And so the concessions had to be made. Were they something we would look at today and consider that to be appropriate? No. But we also, today, we're deluded to believe that context doesn't matter.
Yes.
So, I would say we choose to tear down Washington's statue and Lincoln's statue. Other people who were active in emancipation, for some reason, either we didn't recognize what the statue was, or we just thought that everybody back then had to be horrific because they didn't do enough. We tear them down. Let me ask you a question. Shouldn't we just pass a federal law that bans all statues? And the reason I say that, if we're going to always take things out of context and we're going to disregard history, nobody's going to withstand the test of time. Social changes are going to evolve that are going to make you and I look just marginally better than the cavemen. People are going to look at us like we're troglodytes and say, oh my gosh, back at that point in time, you cut people open with surgery. You had people in different, you use identity politics. You cared about things. And they're actually behavioral issues that we are focused on differences rather than what we have in common. We have so much more in common. It's almost difficult to find a difference, even intellectually, when you really start pushing people.
Yeah.
But it's so easy when you label people.
Yeah.
Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, man, woman, transgender, whatever you choose, or God forbid, Democrat or Republican. That's a bigger divide than anything else. You wear that label and suddenly you're every hateful term that's ever been expressed without ever asking you, well, David, why do you think that way on that particular issue?
See, that's why 2020 was my favorite year ever. I worked in 14 states in 2020. I worked on over a dozen campaigns. I knocked on almost 200,000 doors. I walked like thousands of miles, and I really actually got to have some of those conversations. But the interesting thing was I was a political mercenary for a little while. So I started off with Tulsi Gabbard, and then worked for Young Americans for Liberty, so a bunch of Republican campaigns, and then which included like Trump and Lindsey Graham and Nancy Mace in South Carolina, like a couple of like state house races in Michigan. I ended up doing some ballot initiatives in Michigan and then California, and then back to North Carolina for Biden. So like I really like did the circuit and got to interact with a fuck ton of different people. And like, I was in the coastal states, I was in the Midwest, I was in, I did some Ohio, some Kentucky. I really got a good feel of the country. And in like one of the most divisive years possible, and I was just sitting there literally not really believing what I was saying at the door, right? I'm I'm working for, other than Tulsi on that list, mostly candidates that I don't really necessarily agree with 100%. But what I was able to do was agree with the person I was talking to. And that happened more often than it didn't. And half the time, especially when I was in North Carolina for Biden, because it was like right up to the end, if somebody would come at me like right from the jump, like, oh no, Biden's awful, I would be I would then I would kind of just I would ask them why they thought that, because I'm curious, like, why are you a rational human? Like which avenue of thought led you to the correct conclusion that Biden is awful? Uh, and then I would ask how they felt about Trump, and a bunch of them would be like, "Oh no, he fucking sucks too." And I'm like, "Okay, well, have you heard of Joe Jorgensen? What about Howie Hawkins? Have you interacted with any of these third party candidates at all?" And that was the really interesting question, because I got a range of answers out of that one, because some people would shut me right down and be like, oh no, they're a joke, or they had like semi-legitimate policy reasons why they hated these candidates. Some people would say, no, I didn't realize I had a different option. A lot of people were like, I just wasn't planning on voting at all. But I actually got to really delve into these conversations with people, and it was beautiful.
I used to get that a lot. In 2012, I'd always be asked without exception, I like what you're saying, but if I vote for you, won't I be wasting my vote? And then I'd always say, well, first of all, let's explore that question. Why do you believe that voting your conscience would be wasting your vote? Who told you that? And then they realize, oh, it's my party says that. I said, well, why would they say that? And they inherently figure out that it's because they want to limit competition. So then I'd say, okay, let's look at it another way. Now that we've explored that, we understand where it comes from. What's the bigger? Let's assume for a moment you have vetted all the candidates. And for sake of argument, since I'm in front of you, let's say I'm the person you think would do the best job. At the end of the day, which is the bigger waste? Surrendering your vote to a party that you believe has a higher probability of winning, or voting your conscience for the candidate you've actually determined in your research would do the best job? And you see everybody's uncomfortable at that point in time. Mm-hmm. I won the one internet election. There was a gentleman who he teaches leadership, and he had the idea of creating a safe place because he knew that people would default to Democrat or Republican in most instances. Most people don't have the courage to vote for a third party or an independent. Mm-hmm. So he created an online vote. You could only vote once. You had to verify that you actually were a registered voter and a citizen. And the only thing he asked, he said, take money off the table and look at everybody's solution. And then cast a vote, your conscious vote for the person. It's not going to count on election day. It's not going to make your vote not count. You're not going to be wasting it or anything. Who would you really vote for? And I actually won that election. And it wasn't that I won the election so much was the margin. Barack Obama and Mitt Romney both got over 5%. They finished second and third respectively. And I had 77% and change. Wow. So it wasn't even a close election when you came down who's offering actual solutions. And people knew, well, there's no risk. I can vote for TJ and I won't be throwing my vote away. Mm-hmm. And in that scenario, that safe scenario, it was a blowout for the independent. Mm-hmm. Now, the other thing that happened, you bring up the one thing that happened virtually every time at the end of every presentation, the obligatory line forms, and they're coming by and we're all shaking hands. They're thanking me for talking to the group and taking the time. And I'd say about every fourth person would say exactly what you said you heard. I wasn't going to vote. Mm-hmm. And it was always for one or two reasons. There wasn't a candidate I believed in, or there wasn't a candidate I trusted. And then they'd say, but I'm going to vote for you. Mm-hmm. And if I was still shaking their hand, I put my hand up on their shoulder, their other shoulder, and I'd say, this isn't going to end well, right? Because there's no chance I'm going to win. I'm going to be outspent by $2 billion. So let's, mm-hmm. This isn't, you're voting your conscience. And the real litmus test for me, if I was making a difference in educating people and starting perhaps a little movement, was when they would respond, I don't care. Because then I knew they were paying attention and they had not only met their responsibility as a voter to determine who they felt was actually the best candidate, but they had already mustered the courage to cast that vote. And that's the biggest problem. I said, when people would say, how would you change the country? If there is a way, and the reason I lecture on the neuroscience of behavior, if there's a way that I can change people's behavior to, number one, be responsible enough to do the research, so you're really making an informed vote. You have an obligation, in my opinion. It's a blessing to have the right to vote. Mm-hmm. Not everybody has that right in every country. So right. Respect it and take responsibility for becoming informed. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the courage to cast that vote, whether you think your candidate's going to win or lose, they have no chance of winning if you don't vote for them. But a funny thing might happen when there becomes enough momentum that enough people just consciously vote for the best candidate. You might see an independent or a third-party candidate win the presidency of the United States or other office.
Yeah. I personally, I think it happens one of two ways. There's a slow way where we build up the legitimacy of third parties. And well, I hate the term third party, a minor party, which is also terrible. I don't like
That's better than
diminishing.
worthless or something like that. I mean,
Right. The other
they all have
parties.
labels.
I'll just say Libertarian Party because that's who I am. So like it either happens, but when the Libertarian Party and a couple others like win some more house like state house seats, win some governors, win some Congress people, over the next 10 some odd years, like win local elections and prove that these ideas work, or it takes what you're talking about, which is just a flood of people finally saying, "Wait, fuck this. These two parties have been doing it wrong since John Adams, and the duopoly has been a terrible thing literally since John Adams, and I'm done with it. Let's go back to how we started. Let's try again. Let's go independent."
Yeah, and what fascinates me is, I guess independent is a label, but it's more of a construct around your thought process and what you allow to influence yourself. And we see so hung up, and it is the affiliation, the in-group, out-group behavior, that we want to define ourselves as a member of a party. And it's no knock on the Libertarian. I like the Libertarian Party. There are a lot of aspects of the Libertarian. I've had Nick Sarwark, when he was your chair, was on my show, and great guy. We had a great discussion, and I have a lot of Libertarian friends.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes they're perplexed with me. Why don't you believe in so many of the Libertarian concepts? Yeah, and there's some that I don't.
Mm-hmm.
So
Same.
why it doesn't make a difference to me. I don't feel a need to label myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of libertarians are like you. You don't necessarily agree with the entire platform, and you're not ashamed to say that. Mm-hmm. That's important, because at the end of the day, it's just a person running for a civil service position. Yes. So why don't we evaluate the people on their literacy on the issues? Are they fundamentally well-versed? I will tell you, when I ran, my advanced team always was, shocking to news media when they would have me in, because they would say, well, what does he want to talk about? President Obama limited most of his interactions, if he was going on, particularly on college campuses. He was only going to give a speech on healthcare. That was his big gig.
Yep.
Mitt was only going to talk about the domestic economy. Gary honestly would ask, he wanted to talk about legalization of marijuana. Mm-hmm. That was his number one issue.
Yep.
And then I would come on, and my advanced team was told to tell them any subject, foreign or domestic. And they go, no, you don't understand. And they thought, okay, here's this dweeb from the sticks that doesn't understand. He can put a fence around this and only talk about what he knows. Well, that's what we did do, because I was prepared to talk about any subject, foreign or domestic. Mm-hmm. And we'd go through this, and the crowd sometimes, when somebody would ask, how do you know this stuff? And I said, well, I'm going to give you an example. This is specific to 2012. And I said, and it's not meant to demean Rick Perry, but Rick was on record. They asked Rick Perry, why was he running for president? It came up in one of the debates. And Rick said, well, I was approached by a couple of people, and I'll paraphrase. He didn't say this, but the last part will be an exact quote. Rick said, they basically said, hey, you got rugged good looks. You flew fighter jets. That's pretty cool. You're governor of Texas, and we can raise a heck of a lot of money for you. You should run for president. Rick's exact quote was, I prayed on it for 2 weeks and decided it was God's calling. Now, that's not to denigrate his religion. I admire somebody who's got that level of religious commitment. Mm-hmm. So I'm not, please don't take it the wrong way. I'm not demeaning him as a person or denigrating his religious conviction. But as I told the person asking the question in the audience, when it would come up, I spent 12 to 15,000 hours reviewing the details of every one of these issues, foreign and domestic, and stress testing solutions. Mm-hmm. So I spent 12 to 15,000 hours Rick prayed on it for 2 weeks. You're going to see a difference. And everybody would start laughing. Okay, now I get it. now I understand, None of the people that run really plan on it, with some exceptions. Joe Biden has wanted this for a long time. He ran 3 times.
Joe Biden's never planned anything himself.
Yeah. So it was something he wanted, but they all won it. I was probably the only person that ran that didn't want to win. Because I'll stand by what I said on that syndicated radio show. I had too much integrity and I wasn't a clinical narcissist. You have to be nuts to run for president and really want to win. Would I have served? Yes. Why? My father and a lot of my cousins fought both in Europe and the South Pacific. If they had that type of courage, I have to have the courage to be able to serve my country in this way if my country chose.
Yep.
But the reality was, no rational person wants to be president of the United States.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that one. My entire family is military, and I when I'm sleeping on a cot in a kitchen in an Airbnb, working on a campaign, I'm like, this is so much better than what my dad went through. So, and my grandpa's and my uncles. So I'm cool. Like if this is how I serve, like a lot of people look at the way that I lived my life in 2020 and they're like, I don't know how you survived. Like I made like $6,000 in the year of 2020, I think, maybe somewhere around there. Maybe a little bit more than that. I think maybe it went up to like 8 or 9 with the petitioning that I did at the end. But like, I did not make very much money. I was sleeping on couches and cots and traveling all over the place. And a lot of people were looking at that as some kind of like sacrifice. And I'm like, if this is the service that I have to do, no boot camp involved, no guns, no murdering innocent children. I'm cool. I'm cool with this type of service.
And you got paid way more than that because of the experience you gained.
Oh yeah.
You went around.
I had so much fun.
Before the show's over, I want you to put your knuckles up on the screen because I want to see what they look like after knocking on 200,000 doors. So the guy that knocked on 200,000, you got to have calluses that are unbelievable.
Oh, well, see, now it's actually doorbells mostly, so we don't have to.
Sure, whip out.
Oh my gosh! But it was a great year, and everyone complains about 2020, and it was definitely shitty in a lot of ways. But realistically, I learned more about myself, about my country, about this world, about the people around me, and about the person that I wanted to be in 2020 than I did the other 23 years of my life combined. It was an amazing year, and we're just continuing that rhythm into 2021. I'm now getting to talk to awesome people like yourself every day, and I wouldn't trade it for the world at this point.
Well, you may have overstated when you use the term "awesome" and me. They usually that's like career politician. Those are words that don't go together. I sometimes when I do speaking engagements, I introduce myself as world's biggest loser. They had that show on TV. Have you ever seen the show Biggest Loser? I'm the biggest loser. I lost an election by 60 million votes. But the experience, I changed the lives of potentially tens of thousands of people who will look at politics different. People who will look at how they evaluate issues and how they evaluate candidates different because they got a taste. And it's like the butterfly effect. It's probably never going to happen in my lifetime. It may happen in yours. I hope it does. But it may be a few generations from now before there's enough momentum. But you never know what that triggering is. And I have that experience to fall back on. So, it was a cash out scenario back in 2012 because I wasn't being paid to run. So I was not making money running. You at least made $6,000. That would have been big money for the candidate. I made money since then. I will admit, I've had presidential candidates and senators and congressman. So I've made a little money since then.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't trade the experience for any number you name.
Yeah. Yeah, I would like to make good money in politics, but I realized doing what I did in 2020, the only way to really make good money in politics is to sell yourself out. You're either volunteering or working for like minimal dollars on some campaign that you actually care about, or you're getting paid nicely and put up in a nice hotel room to work for somebody like Joe Biden. Like those are your options. And you can work for Tulsi Gabbard or you can work for Joe Biden, and but you know what you're signing up for.
Or if you come over to the dark side and you become corrupt, you can run for office. So and then
I
you can
did that. That was
money.
fun. That got me a whole like $110 I raised for my city council campaign. That
Well,
was
you've
exciting.
got years to
Oh yeah.
evolve in that way. So
Oh yeah. I've got years before I ever run again. I was really like gearing up for another run in the next year or two. I thought maybe it was mayor this year or something in Albany next year. And I decided not to run for mayor this year. There's somebody else running who I'm her deputy campaign manager. I stepped back when somebody objectively better entered the race, uh, or like the primary within the Libertarian Party, and I don't think next year is going to be a thing either. I don't think I want to stay put anywhere long enough to run for office. I worked in like I've said it a couple times, like 14 states last year. I want to beat that this year. I want to touch all 50 in the next year and a half. Like I don't want to put down roots anywhere yet. So
well,
it's
I
going to be a
admire what
while.
you're doing. You're helping a lot of different people. You're meeting many more people than you otherwise would.
Hmm.
That'll help you formulate your solutions. Because the only thing I would encourage you if and when you run, and I suspect you probably will based on your enthusiasm, have real solutions
Hmm.
and don't just bow to a party and don't just promote a platform.
Hmm.
Think through the issues, come up with real solutions, consider all the alternatives, because that's what the people deserve and that's what the people need.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned the Libertarian Party a little bit ago, and I agree with most criticisms that people have of our party. But in my opinion, one of the reasons why I actually joined up and became and stayed active is for most of the same reasons why we don't win anything. But the reason why I think that we're worth it and we're different is like the infighting and the constant challenging of everyone's beliefs. Uh, it makes it to where we're, even if we somehow become successful someday as a party, we're not going to be like the Democrats or the Republicans with their groupthink bullshit, because it's impossible. Like it is impossible to get five libertarians into a room together and have them actually agree on something. It's physically impossible. So we don't have to necessarily worry about them getting a majority in Congress and then just like ramrodding stupid legislation through because they are all just checking yes. Like that's not how any libertarians operate. So and I agree that, or what you said was true. I don't agree with the party platform completely. There's a couple of things on there that I'm like, eh. And then there's a couple of things on there that I wouldn't actually run on. There's a couple of things on there that I believe but don't think are realistic in the time frame of a term. So I wouldn't run on. Uh, but we have that freedom in the party, and other third parties are somewhat similar. Uh, but I agree that you really run a risk when you start labeling yourself and you start joining that group and you start otherizing people and you start us-sizing some people and drawing those lines. Because yeah, I could very easily come into this conversation with you in and aren't you a libertarian yet? You believe so much of what we believe. You could be helping us grow the party. You could have ran on our platform. Or on our line, we wouldn't have had to worry about the write-in campaign. Like I could have come in here with a pitch of like why you should be a libertarian and probably done a half decent job, but it wouldn't have gone anywhere, right? Like you've probably heard a pitch similar dozens and dozens of times, and you have reasons for why you haven't joined the party yet. And I'm never going to convince you in our first conversation to become a libertarian. Like it's just not a thing.
Well, in all honesty, I've had people ask me actually in 2018 and 2016 for different offices. Certain 2016, I had people approach me to run again. Mm-hmm. And the one thing I have said is I'll never run unless I'm on all 50 ballots, because the first time I was educating people, the second time I will try and become a viable candidate. Mm-hmm. But working with any party, the problem is the relationship for a lot of people. The assumption is that the relationship changes as soon as money changes hands. Mm-hmm. So as soon as they say, hey, we're going to get you the ballot line, we're going to get you the state coverage and put together the team that's going to go out and canvass the people like you who will knock on 200,000 doors and so forth. Mm-hmm. Then it's almost like working for the mob. The party tends to come back and say, you owe us. Mm-hmm. And if I found a party, libertarian or otherwise, that actually said, we want to run a candidate that's done the type of work that you've done and represents what you represent, and we won't try and force you to conform or to promote other candidates, to be distracted from doing your job. And now I'm talking about a presidential run. Mm-hmm. There is no higher office in the world. And to use it as a campaign leverage or a party leverage, to me, disrespects the office. So would I run for a third party, minor party, whatever you want to call it, libertarian party? Yeah, I would give it serious thought if the leadership committed to allow me to represent the party on an independent basis, mm-hmm. to exercise my best judgment, because the people aren't voting for the party, they're voting for the candidate. Yeah. And if you've got the right candidate who has done the work and can rationally process the solution and knows how to actually bring the parties together. Now, you were out there pushing for Joe this last time. Joe promised unity. Hmm. His rhetoric is anything but unifying today.
Oh, yeah. That was complete bullshit.
Yeah, I had people challenge me. They said, well, how would you bring the parties together? Because both parties would hate you. True. They absolutely would. And I said, I've got a plan. They said, what would you do? And I said, depending on how you walk, it's a 16 to 18 block walk between the White House and the Capitol. And if it was a nice day, I'd take that walk. Otherwise, I'd be driven up to it. But I'd ask for permission, because you have to ask for permission to appear between the joint chambers. And I would talk to them and I said, okay, I understand. Let's be clear. I'm not naive. I understand that the Republicans aren't happy with me in office. The Democrats aren't happy in office. But let me explain what's going to transpire. And you'll see it in the bills they're trying to pass now, H.R. 1 and the bill that they just passed that supposedly was all tied to COVID. They title these bills as if they are focused, and they're anything but focused. It's like where's Waldo looking for the actual issue that's associated with the title. So I had a plan. I was going to walk in and tell them day one, because people said, you're not going to be able to control them. They're going to run roughshod. You'll get nothing done. And I said, no, I'm going to go in the first day and I'm going to tell them what the new rules are. And the new rules are, I have the power of a veto. You could override my veto, but I have the power of a veto. So here's how it's going to work. If a bill makes it to my desk through the House and the Senate, it has to be singularly focused on a critical issue. Mm-hmm. And if it's singularly focused, I may agree or not agree totally with the bill, but if I think it has a rational basis and it is nonpartisan and it focuses on resolving the issue for the people of the United States, I will sign that bill into law. But if I don't, and if I find that there are elements of it that pander to partisan interests, I will not only guarantee you that I will veto it, I will guarantee you I will be on every major news outlet that day. And I will not only tell the world why I vetoed it, but I will tell them who sponsored the offending parts of the legislation. And if I agree with the rest of the bill, the substantive part of the bill, then I will tell them if it comes back to my desk clean, I will sign this into law. But if it doesn't, I won't. And by the way, one more thing you all ought to know, because I have a technical background, so I'm comfortable with social media. We're going to exploit social media and the mainstream media. In 60 days before the next election, I'm going to remind everybody. I'm going to create a website, and I'm going to personally come on the air and remind everybody of who tried to bastardize the legislation that I vetoed and why I vetoed it. And then I'm going to probably, just out of the goodness of my heart, remind everybody for about every 15 days leading up to the election so that we make sure that problem doesn't repeat itself. And then people would ask, I said, do you really think that would happen? I said, oh, they'll test me. The first 2 or 3 times, they'll try and cram a bill through. Mm-hmm. But the reality is, the first 2 or 3 times I bounce it and I publicly embarrass them as they deserve to be, that won't happen again. Right. And we'll start seeing clean bills come through that are focused on the best interests of the people rather than the best interests of a party.
Are you familiar with the One Subject at a Time Act?
Yes.
My favorite piece of legislation that's ever been written. I wish Congresswoman Love was still around and writing legislation. She served very short term and sponsored one of the best pieces of legislation that's ever been sponsored. Luckily, Rand Paul re-sponsored it this past year in the Senate, and I think Massey said that he was planning on redoing it this year in the House.
That's where your first comment about an independent president does come into play, because an independent president has the ability to accelerate that change. I did another video. I closed a show on TV one time. They gave me the last 5 minutes, and it's been republished by IVN a number of times on independent speaker. You want to change Congress quickly? Speaker of the House doesn't have to be a member of Congress.
Right.
I could be the next Speaker of the House. If the House had the courage and they couldn't decide on a speaker, and they brought in a nonpartisan speaker, first thing that's going to change, committee assignments are going to be based on qualification, not on how much money you raised or what favors I owe you or what background you have on people. No, it's going to be based singularly. I don't care if it ends up all Democrat, all Republican. It's going to be singularly based on qualification. And we'll probably get a better balance. So you won't have people that know nothing about finance running the finance committee, or people who are just a vacuum when it comes to healthcare, dealing with healthcare. Same thing with defense, same thing with security and so forth. So we're going to pick the right people in the right seat on the bus, as the old book said. The other thing you do is then you tell them how clean the bill has to be, because you control the floor. You control what comes to the floor for a vote. And so you tell them the criteria of how clean the bill needs to be. And again, they may push you internally and try and throw some things through that have pork in it and all that. And when you send it back to committee and they're getting nothing accomplished and you're exposing it, well, we would have had a vote today, except the committee came back with a bill that was tainted. And so I refused to bring it up for a vote. You start bringing that type of power from a speaker position, you're going to have a tremendous impact in a short period of time.
I love that idea. When Pelosi was up for re-election, there was a lot of people talking about, just pick somebody else, make it like literally anybody else. And I very much loved the concept of having a speaker that isn't actually a voting member of Congress.
Nonpartisan.
Nonpartisan. Yeah, just completely.
Then you make sure the House actually does the people's business, which is what its mission is.
Yeah. We had a really cool thing happen here in upstate New York for nonpartisan politics in 2017. We elected a mayor of Syracuse, New York, in a five-way race. So there was a Democrat, a Republican, a Libertarian, a Green Party, and an Independent. And the Independent took 53% of the vote, just destroyed the other four. Just out of nowhere, and he was offered both the Republican and Democrat and Libertarian lines. Democrat not quite as much, or well, it wasn't an official offer necessarily, but the Republican and Libertarian parties both like officially offered him the line, and he turned it down. He was like, "No, I
Good for him.
Fuck party politics. I am an independent. I have been an independent since I registered to vote when I was 18. I am going to remain an independent. We're going to keep this going." Both his dad and his grandpa were elected Republicans, but he was just, even at 18, while his dad was a congressman, he registered as an independent and was like, "Nope, I'm not doing that." And then he worked for a Democratic mayor, the one before him, and then we actually saw an entire city, and it's the fourth largest city in the state. You like actually say, "Yeah, independent. That sounds good." So,
God bless him. I mean, that's the way you get things done. But the fastest way to change national politics is either independent president or independent speaker. And the other thing I'll throw out, we talked about the 17th Amendment, so I know you're into stuff like that. I'll share one other thing. The only federal offices in the United States, truly federal offices, the presidency and the vice presidency. Now, why do I say that? So when they talk about federalizing elections and so forth, you could do it with the president and the vice president because they're the only federal offices. Every other office has a discernible nexus with a state.
Yep.
You're either physically representing a district or you are representing the state if you're a senator. So the state can run rules and regulations concerning those elections. They should have no authority. The libertarians may want to take up this cause. They should have no authority over the president and vice president on the elections. And I tested it. I got thrown out of a bunch of states. And I'll share what the conversations were like. The very first one, I won't tell you the state because it would be an embarrassment to the director of elections. But they sent my application back. And they sent it back because they said I didn't complete it. And I said, well, I paid the fee. This was for write-in. I paid the fee and I filed the form. And they said, well, you didn't name a vice president. Now, the Whig Party that had endorsed me knew I wasn't going to do that. And I did it to try and get people aware of the 12th Amendment, which is also ignored most of the time. It's like the 17th. It's about as popular. And what happened was the person from the state said, well, our state regulation XYZ mandates that you list the vice president and you have his signature and have his address. And I said, I listed my vice president. He said, well, no, you didn't. It was blank. I said, no, it wasn't. I said, it said that running as an independent, it's irrelevant to me as to who the vice president would be, whether it be the Democrat, it's likely to be the Democrat or the Republican candidate. And I will accept whoever the people of the United States decide will be through the electors will decide to be vice president of the United States. He said, well, you can't do that. Our state law says X, Y, and Z. I said, well, are you familiar with the 12th Amendment? And he goes, well, of course, but not off the top of my head. And I said, oh, well, let me read it to you. So I read it to him and I explained to him the actual language says that the president is decided by a vote in the House and the vice president is chosen by a separate vote in the Senate. There is nothing that says they need to run as a party ticket. There is nothing that says that they should be considered that way. You could have a Republican president and a Democrat vice president.
Mm-hmm.
Or you could have an independent who's willing to accept either. So I explained this to him and he goes, well, we still have this state law. And I said, okay, well, we've established you're not familiar with the 12th Amendment. I said, are you familiar with the Supremacy Clause? And he goes, well, of course I'm familiar, with the Supremacy Clause. I said, what does the Supremacy Clause say to you? And he says, well, it says that where federal law exists, federal law is the supreme law of the land. I said, well, how's the 12th Amendment for federal law? And he goes, well, I can't resolve this. I'll have the Attorney General get back to you, but we're busy. We're in the middle of election. Like I didn't know that. He goes, we're in the middle of an election. We'll get back to you after the election. Well, that's going to help.
We'll get back to you after the election.
I had about 10 or 12 states. I think it was 12 states that didn't allow me to officially be counted as a write-in in their states. There were 6 other states that don't even allow write-ins, and I got the only write-in in the history of Louisiana, which doesn't accept write-ins, but a person illegally took a picture of it. He shouldn't have done it, so I told him I'm going to trash the photo, but he wrote it in the margin. He was so incensed that he didn't get to exercise his First Amendment right to vote for the candidate of his choice as a write-in. And he had the courage to cast it. He actually wrote it in the margin. So I know I've gotten the only unofficial write-in vote in the history of Louisiana.
That's awesome.
It's funny. The states create these rules, and while they have a nexus with the House and the Senate, there isn't any such rule that says if I'm running for president or you're running for president, that you have any particular nexus with any single state.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, you want to federalize elections, federalize the election with respect to the president and vice president, make the rules uniform, because if you run, you'll find out as an independent, there are 50 different sets of rules. You'll find out that the parties have jury-rigged the system so that you may have to get 10,000, 20,000, 150,000 signatures, depending on the state, which is why it costs upwards of $50 to $70 million to get on the ballot as an independent, while the Democrat or Republican gets picked, even for the primary. So they may get rid of 4 or 5 Democrats and Republicans who are trying to run because they haven't raised enough money for the party, or they aren't well-heeled or indebted to somebody's indebted to them. They run the big names, and those people run for free. So they conserve cash, they conserve time, and they're automatically on the ballot, while you and I have to desperately try and get a position. And that happens at the state and local level as well, to anybody running as an independent or a third party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just finished up our petitioning period. Actually, for New York, the Libertarian Party, we have to petition twice this year because we're in the middle of a lawsuit as to whether or not we're going to retain ballot access. So we petitioned the last couple of weeks as if we're going to win this lawsuit. So as an active libertarian party, we petitioned enrolled libertarians to get on the libertarian line. But then in a few weeks here, we're going to have to petition again as if we lost the lawsuit, because the lawsuit's going to end here pretty soon, or we're going to get a preliminary injunction here pretty soon, hopefully.
People don't realize what happens in the states. I'll give you 2 extreme examples. One was New York. We submitted the appropriate signatures, and we had the electors in New York to qualify. Mm-hmm. They determined that it wasn't turned in time. It was. We had certification of the fact when it was received and all that. They just decided to say no. So you can't be on the ballot. If you want to challenge it, you can challenge it after the election. Thanks a lot.
Mm.
And California came back after the deadline had passed for electors. We had carefully screened every elector. We had the 55 that were required at the time. We had all of that verified. They were all in weeks in advance. So they had it for probably 30, 45 days.
Mm-hmm.
They contacted me 2 days after the deadline passed and said that there were a few that they challenged the address on. And so I didn't have a sufficient number of electors to be included as a valid write-in. And I said, can I amend? Reasonable question. No, you've missed the deadline. Well, I didn't miss the deadline. You didn't bother to inform me. Now, I had a presidential candidate in 2016. They did the exact same thing. I warned the candidate in California. I said, let me tell you what's going to happen. And they did the same thing. Notified him after the date that his application wasn't sufficient. It was being rejected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Board of Elections are doing some really shifty stuff 99% of the time, and the other 1% of the time they're purging voter rolls. Like they don't do anything useful. But TJ, so before we wrap up, I definitely want to give you an opportunity to pitch and plug what you're working on right now, what you've been up to so far this year, and how people can help support you and get involved.
Well, I do strategic consulting for companies. So if you've got a company that needs a repairman, like I said, I do turnarounds and help companies with strategic thinking. But in the political side, I've predominantly worked with federal candidates, but I'm open to work with state and local candidates under the right circumstances. So if there's somebody whose campaign I can help with from a strategic communication standpoint or from an issue standpoint, if you have a critical issue and you're not really sure how to solve it, I've probably looked at it over the years. I've got an extra 15, 18, 20,000 hours to what I had in 2012. And feel free to contact me. I have a show called Deconstructed on IVN that is usually posted every 2 weeks. Have very well-known individuals as my guest. I've been blessed in that regard. Mm-hmm. It's a fun show. I give everybody, I think, a safe forum. So we will challenge each other a little bit, but I let them get their message out. So if anybody has a political issue they'd like to air, and they can do it credibly and civilly, then they're invited to be a guest on my show. If you want to follow what I've done, I've got a full media library that has books, articles, all of my podcasts, television shows I've done, and so forth that are still available. Go to tjohara.com. That's tjohara.com, and just click on the media library, and you can waste days on that site. It's a big library. Facebook. I
wasted a couple in preparation.
Well, I'm glad. I hope I'm glad. I hope you enjoyed it.
Oh, for sure.
Facebook, it's O'Hara 2012. Twitter, it's at TJ O'Hara 2012. LinkedIn, link with me there. That's where I do most of my business posts, and I interact with people, but I interact with people politically there as well. That's TJ O''Hara. I get the apostrophe in for the Irish part of my family. TJ O'Hara on LinkedIn. If you reach out to me, I will accept your invitation, and you're welcome on Facebook. I pose one political question a day, usually 5 to 6 days a week. And as long as your answer is civil and factually based, you're welcome to participate in that forum. So look forward to continuing to interact with you, David. Sometimes I'll probably be on your side. Sometimes I may not, just to try and get you that dose of that deadly dose of adrenaline and cortisol. But for the most part, I think you and I will be mostly in alignment. And I just want to sincerely thank you for inviting me as a guest on your show, and being so generous with your time. And I wish you continued success with not only the show, but someday I hope to have the opportunity to vote for you.
Oh, well, I really appreciate that, and I hope that as well. And it looks like I might be going out west, so the likelihood of you being able to vote for me might be more realistic at a local level here in the near future.
Well, I'll look
Uh,
forward to that. If you're ever out here, give me a call and we'll grab a coffee.
oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Well, yeah, thanks again, guys. Thanks for watching. If you don't already do so, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it, and then go to tjohara.com and check out everything that TJ's been doing. Because, yeah, you've really done your research. You've got so much information on that website. I could answer at least half of the questions that I have for like all of my policy stuff, just your website. So I've actually pulled some of it for policy on campaigns already. So
Excellent. Well, that's what it's there for. You can make the world a better place if I can help you in any way. That's all I can ask.
Well, I really just want to thank you for what you've been doing and encourage you to keep up the good work.
Thank you, sir.
All right, guys. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you back here next time.
Hey fighters, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos. If you want to learn more or get involved, go to fightforliberty.com/join or reach out to us on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter at Fight for Liberty. If you want to help keep the show going, Patreon and Cash App are the way to do that. We'll catch you back here next time. Until then, keep up the fight.